Mariana Lima Buendia is a name that has spread throughout Mexico. A brutal crime was committed against this woman, and this tragedy affected not only her family, but also the legislation in the country. In 1981, a young family living in Esota, a municipality in the state of Mexico, had their firstborn child, a girl born on March 25th. She was named Mariana. The mother, Mariana Buendia Cortés, was once a symbol of the struggle in the country. She then lived in the town of Morelos, and locals characterized her as a rebel because she dared to contradict her father, Mariana Buendia. He was known as a true tyrant, regularly beat her mother, and soon abandoned the family. And after a while, he died in some rundown motel. The family was left without a breadwinner, 12 children and a single mother, and they all had to change their residency and move to the federal district. The medical professionals there could help the youngest daughter, Magdalena, cure meningitis. Mariana was in 7th grade at the time, and due to the situation, she dropped out of school and got a job as a laborer at the market. She and her mother managed to raise money for the necessary medication for Magdalena, and the girl was saved. The rescue took a long time, and the family settled in the colony of El Sol in the state of Ciudad de Todos. There, Mariana found a new job as a servant in a wealthy house. One of the key events in her life occurred a few years later. She, contrary to local moral canons, lived together with a man without being married to him. She gave birth to 2 children by him, Aurelio and Guadalupe. But then her lover ran away. And a little later, her new chosen one was José Lauro Ignacio Lima Cervantes, for loved ones, simply Lauro. The couple got married and bought an apartment in Nesa. Lauro then worked at the Modelo brewery, organizing and supervising the delivery of ice. Mariana had saved up money to open her own juice and smoothie stand. The couple worked hard and after a while bought a house. Their children grew up in it, Marianne, Laura, and Sandocana. Marianne grew up in a family of hard workers, and the skills to help her loved ones were instilled in her from childhood. She enjoyed life and loved dancing, showed interest in various sciences and hobbies, playing the flute, taking embroidery courses, working as a makeup artist, etc. After graduating from high school, the girl began studying at a liberal arts college at the National Autonomous University, Faculty of Law. After graduating from school, the girl began to study at the Humanitarian College at the National Autonomous University at the Faculty of Law. Mariana saw herself as a lawyer in the future, helping people and solving various cases in the name of justice. She inherited the best qualities from her parents: dedication to work and study, a subtle outlook, a keen sense of justice. As a student, she created unique postcards, which she successfully sold and used the proceeds to pay for food and transportation. In her senior year, she planned to stay in college to pursue a master's degree in criminal justice. In 2006, she took a job at the Justice Center in Chimalhuacan. In her line of work, she often had to interact with an investigator at the Attorney General's office of the state of Mexico. He was a spectacular man of 43 years old named Julio Cesar Hernandez Balinas. 2 darkest tragedies had occurred in his life. Both of his sons had died. One was born dead, the other committed suicide. In 2008, the girl achieved the desired goal, became a bachelor. To celebrate this event, she invited colleagues to her family home. She did not yet have a diploma in hand, but this formality was to be resolved soon. At the celebration appeared an imposing investigator, Julio Cesar. He immediately aroused the dislike of Mariana's parents for his arrogance and rudeness. However, it was with him that the girls soon began a stormy romance. And the relationship once led to the fact that the man was forced to ask her parents for permission to marry. To this, he received a refusal. However, the lovers, against the will of the bride's parents, still got married. The event took place on September 13, 2008. The marriage was concluded only before the authorities, because earlier the groom had already concluded a similar union with another citizen and in a Catholic church. The wedding was attended by no more than 20 people. From the bride's side, only a relative and a few friends, including Marcela, another opponent of this wedding. On the groom's side, only his mother and sister, Mary Bell. After becoming officially newlyweds, the couple moved to Chimalhuacan, to the home of the newly married husband. At first, family life was going fine. The honeymoon was fabulous, and Mariana was bathed in happiness. However, over time, Julio changed, behaved hysterically and aggressively, humiliated his wife and beat her, demanded to leave work and do only housekeeping. She received the first blow from her husband for allegedly poorly cooked meat. Then such attacks became regular. The spouse demanded to keep the house in perfect cleanliness and nagged at every little thing. The girl endured insults and humiliation and tried to be an exemplary wife. For what she received even worse treatment. For example, Julio refused to eat the soup she cooked, took away all her money, and sent her to dine in a soup kitchen for beggars. As time went on, the attacks did not stop, but were accompanied by insults, accusations, and threats. Once her husband called Mariana a thief and promised to punish her for it, beat her unconscious with a baseball bat, forced intimacy by threatening her with a gun, constantly calling her a fallen woman and a cheater. But in practice, the husband himself repeatedly visited brothels, had several mistresses, and he repeatedly put them to Mariana as an example, say, "This is how to behave in bed." The girl's mother, father, and friends knew about her husband's tyranny and advised her to go to the police. But she denied it and continued to believe in her husband's bright changes. In addition, he had connections among the police leadership, and there simply would have hushed up the case. Since 2010, Mariana stopped coming to her parents' house. Her mother got worried and paid a visit to her daughter and found her in a terrible state. Her leg was covered with bandages from foot to knee. This was the result of a fall down the stairs from a push from her husband. Also on the eve of this incident, Julio had injured one of his mistresses. Mariana learned about this act of violence from the perpetrator's own confession when he was drunk. The guilty man was very worried about his deed because the woman he had beaten was considered a witch and could cast curses on him. He projected all his anger onto his wife. After 1.5 years, Mariana admitted to her family that she was ready to file for divorce. On June 26th, her spouse again attacked her with claims of theft. The girl objected to him, said that he was making it all up, for which she was again beaten. At night, she managed to escape and called her mother, saying that she was going to her parents' house. But Julio intercepted her halfway there. He did not, however, lock her up anywhere, beat her, or even resent her. The night passed relatively quietly, and in the morning he took his wife to her parents. Of course, he himself did not dare to enter the house, and in the car once again quarreled with Mariana. She yelled at him and broke out of the car. While at home, she confessed to her mother that the next day she was ready to file for divorce and would go to court herself. All that remained was to get her things out of the tyrant's den. She arrived there alone at about noon. Her mother expected her back by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The women awaited the cherished end of constant humiliation and beatings. But her daughter did not return by the appointed time, and she did not contact her the next day either. Her cell phone could not be reached because the tyrant forbade the use of gadgets in his house. There was only a landline. Julio did not pick up the phone, and closer to evening called Irenea himself and said that Mariana decided to commit suicide. The girl's family immediately arrived at the home of Hernandez Balinas. It was suspiciously quiet there. No police, no medics, no criminal experts. The owner did not respond to loud calls to come out, so Irenea entered the house herself. Right at the entrance stood Mariana's packed suitcase, and in the bedroom and the daughter herself, dead on the bed. Beside her were a pile of wet towels, a TV remote, a cell phone, a bag with her passport and other documents, a second suitcase with clothes. The dead woman's arms and legs were wrinkled. She resembled a drowning woman. Her cheeks and mouth were blackened, her lower jaw hung down, and her teeth clamped the tip of her tongue. Guadalupe and Sandokan, sister and brother of the deceased, immediately left the bedroom without holding back tears. And the mother was left alone with her daughter's corpse, alerted by the following aspects. If indeed Mariana had decided to commit suicide by strangulation, she would certainly not have done it in bed. The daughter was wearing the same clothes in which she had last visited her mother. a short blouse, and boxers. Huge wound on her thigh over 10 centimeters long. Swollen crotch with bruising. Scratch on the forehead. Soon, the medical examiner arrived with a camera and a group of police officers with Julio Cesar. He was immediately invited for questioning. He said that he arrived home in the early morning, did not find his keys with him, knocked on the door and called for his wife. Silence. He sneaked into the house through the window and came to the bedroom, where he found Marianne hanging on a metal washer. Her husband immediately took her down and performed resuscitative actions, but it was already useless. At the scene of the tragedy, Julio asked Irenea where her daughter had left the suicide note. The woman was confused and replied that no notes from her daughter were left here. The son-in-law also showed police photos taken when the wife was found, sitting on a chair with a cord around her neck, with her hand pressed against the wall. Experts examined the scene to the scolding of Irenea and Julio. She accused him of being the one who drove her daughter mad and even of possible murder. Police escorted the enraged woman out of the bedroom. She went to the bathroom to wash up and found these strange things: a knife in the wall, a cognac bottle on the table, a wet rug. It looked as if there had been a struggle and a drowning had occurred. The son-in-law assured her that Marianne had taken the brandy alone, which was strange, for the girl had never drunk alcohol. The mother had great doubts that her daughter had committed suicide. In her eyes, Julio was an executioner. She, leaving, shouted to him that he could escape criminal responsibility thanks to his connections, but he could not escape God's punishment. Specialists investigated the scene rather negligently. They spent only 15 minutes to study the body and the surroundings. There was no cordon around the area and no evidence collection, not even the cord with which Marianne was allegedly strangled. The police report included general information that the corpse had not been touched, and the attached photos were of poor quality. The police interviewed Mariana's family and friends. All unanimously stated that the girl was a victim of tyranny, physical, psychological, and sexual. But the Attorney General of the state of Mexico ignored their testimony and left the official version of taking her own life. The weapon was a 5mm cable. It was not admitted to the case until 11 months after the incident. And on the day the corpse was found, the experts simply failed to notice such an important piece of evidence. The case was officially closed, and this did not give the mother of the deceased rest. She set a goal: to prove Julio's guilt in the murder of her daughter. On the background of stress, the unhappy mother's health seriously deteriorated. Doctors found her apnea. Now she was forced to sleep alone and breathe with the help of an oxygen cylinder, which was placed in the next room. But in this environment, Irenea was given ideal conditions for thinking and analyzing the facts. Her notebook described every detail of Marianne's death: injuries on her body, surrounding details, clothing. Being alone, the woman was addicted to watching Law & Order. Each series was educational for her and presented interesting ways of investigation and working with evidence. The movie became a kind of training for Irenea, honing how she should communicate with the authorities to prove the guilt of the true killer. Next, the woman carefully studied all of her daughter's textbooks on law and criminal law. Having enriched herself with the necessary knowledge, she was fully convinced that the manner of her daughter's death had been staged and the case collapsed. In addition, the investigator's materials contained only 5 pages. This is extremely small for a case like this. After examining the police records, Irenea came up with 2 different versions. The first was Julio himself, who had allegedly found the body. The second was her own, according to which her son-in-law was a tyrant and a murderer. The investigators' report itself consisted of 20 lines. It is a rather superficial description of the work at the scene where the body was found, without details or the pathologist's report. The justice system worked negligently, allowing many flaws. The record did not include notes about marks and wounds on the victim's body and the husband's harsh treatment of her while she was alive. Irenea documented all the discrepancies and began to fight the system with the help of her husband and children. Of course, the road to the triumph of justice was full of obstacles and dangers. And it turned out this way. Applying to the police to start a new investigation, taking into account the inconsistencies. Denial of the request by the Tlanepantla State Prosecutor's Office was expressed in an official document dated 09/09/2011. Reasons: the case was closed, the cause of death, taking her own life. On September 19, 2011, she filed a written appeal to the Attorney General of the country. Irinea's act was drafted by specialists of the National Organization for Combating Femicide. The essence of the petition is the same: the need for a new investigation. But on the part of the authorities, there was ignoring the appeal. They did not respond in due time, and the act simply disappeared. There was also an appeal to other legal structures and a similar response from them. On March 4, 2012, she filed a petition to the local court. The reason: ignoring appeals from the prosecutor's office. The woman threatened that she would voice such attitude of the authorities towards her and her daughter's death publicly. Irinea kept her word. Rallies followed, attended by herself, her family, and Mariana's friends, as well as representatives of women's rights organizations. The judge considered the complaint. It was not within his power to order a new investigation, but he sent a formal order to the prosecutor's office to look into Irinea's appeal. An appeal to the Supreme Court followed. Of course, the highest instance was not in a hurry to study the petition. The family of the deceased continued to organize rallies demanding the restoration of justice. She was supported by all women's human rights organizations in Mexico and by women who were indifferent and outraged by the work of justice in this case. On October 22, 2013, the Supreme Judge granted the petition to re-examine the circumstances of Mariana's death. The process dragged on, and it was only in 2015, on March 25, that the responsible prosecutors received a court order requiring them to reopen the case. In addition, the authorities were influenced by growing public outrage. Feminicide became the basis for the reopening of the investigation. For Mexico, this was the first time that the Supreme Court was obliged to investigate a gender-based crime. This has generated significant public outcry and new laws protecting women's safety. According to the Judicial Act, all criminal acts against women must be investigated by law enforcement agencies with a gender perspective. A little later, a set of rules came out requiring courts to use records of prevention, investigation, and prosecution of the lawbreaker. What stood out was the order to punish all those who investigated Mariana's death and closed the case rather quickly. They committed a lot of violations and resisted justice. They were ordered to pay damages to the family of the deceased. The sums were insignificant, but this was the first step in the new reforms. Subsequently, in view of the changes in the legal framework, adjustments were made in the training of personnel for the justice system. Since then, feminicide has become a criminal offense. After 5 years of desperate confrontation with the system, Irinea and her allies achieved their goal. The Mexico City State Prosecutor's Office reopened the investigation on the basis of the feminicide case. A little later, in November, in the city of Chimalhuacan, Irinea organized a march in memory of her daughter. Several hundred participants gathered. A political statement was made in the main square, in the presence of television, pointing out the problem of the high number of illegal acts against women in the municipality. In the same month, an investigation was launched, and many documents and materials on such crimes were found. They were examined by lawyer Brenda Salina Bazan and her team. It revealed corrupt links in justice and the indifference of the authorities to violence against women. As for Mariana's case, shocking irregularities and police unprofessionalism were revealed. Disregard for evidence and traces at the crime scene, incorrectly stating in the report the height of the iron hoop on which the deceased allegedly hanged herself. Incomplete analysis of the available evidence. No comprehensive forensic examination was performed. Julio's cell phone was not checked, and his calls from the moment the body was found until he testified were not traced. The investigators failed to verify Julio's testimony about Mariana's last day and failed to note that he was on friendly terms with the police officers who arrived at the scene. The investigation ignored the testimony of the victim's family about systematic acts of violence against her. The delay in responding to the appeals filed by Marianne's mother was also quite suspicious. The authorities did not even consider that the girl's death had anything to do with gender-based violence. The team's work continued and found that before testifying, Julio had wirelessly transmitted several pictures of Mariana to his fellow police officers on the case. These he took before putting his wife to bed. To his friends, he informed them that his spouse had died due to sexual assault, and the companions should only study the facts, which he would point out later. And that information never made it into the report. Also, Julio admitted in his testimony that on the eve of his wife's death, he argued with her on the phone because she allegedly did not let him go to a friendly night out at a bar, but he still left. When he returned in the morning, he found her hanging. It was disconcerting that the victim had left a suicide note somewhere, and no one had seen the note. The husband assured the police that everything was clear, his wife had committed suicide, and there was no need to bother with the case. The second strange point: the relatives were obliged to leave the bedroom where Marianne's corpse was found, then closed the door, ostensibly for the work of investigators and experts. The third disturbing point is that the old file did not include the names of the specialists who performed the autopsy and studied the scene. The facts discovered indicated that Julio himself was part of the team responsible for researching and securing the bedroom where the body was found. The area was not cordoned off, and key evidence, such as the wire used to kill the girl and her cell phone, was not preserved. On the same day, 2 expert examinations were conducted to determine the height of the iron ring to which the deceased may have been tied, and the figures differed by 4 or 5 centimeters, and all reports indicated that the bed was the place of death. We studied the subsequent report of the expert who came to the bedroom with the police. He indicated that it was too messy to collect the evidence. The pathologists also distinguished themselves in a negative way. They took only trivial tests, did not study the bruises on the corpse, and did not establish whether the girl had been raped before her death. Brenda's team discovered all the mistakes of the previous investigation and started new work almost from scratch. It took her about a year to reconstruct the materials and gather evidence. The result of their labors was the criminal prosecution of Julio Cesar. The exhumation of the victim's corpse, approved by the court, made a huge contribution to this. Experts determined the cause of death, strangulation, and injuries from sexual assault. Fragments of the killer's skin were found under the victim's fingernails. They were preserved years later. Forensics determined that these particles belonged to Julio Cesar. And on June 23, 2016, the perpetrator was arrested and placed in a temporary detention center. The defendant's lawyers intervened and sought to delay the process for as long as possible. For 7 years, they filed various appeals and intimidated the Buendia family to drop the charges. There were even some egregious incidents. 1. On August 12, 2019, Irenea's son Aurelio was grabbed by intruders right on the street and brutally beaten. During the attack, they shouted for his family to get behind the allegedly innocent Julio. The second happened in January 2020. The attack on Mariana's sister Guadalupe, an unknown assailant shot her car 6 times and fled. Fortunately, she managed to duck, and the bullets only shattered the glass and lodged in the car door. The defense was skillfully stalling. Because of all the stress and strain, Marianne's father was experiencing tremendous health difficulties, and in 2018, he passed away. He didn't get to live to see the day justice was won. Irenea herself steadfastly held the blows of fate, and the attacks on Aurelio and Guadalupe did not break her. The family did not give up their position. The woman gained popularity throughout the country for her character and pursuit of truth. She was seen as a national heroine, a symbol in the fight against aggression against women. Because of the assassination attempts, the Buendia family had to ask for help from the authorities under the Witness Protection Program and the Association of Journalists. They even had to change their place of residence for safety. It was dangerous to be in Nesa, where there were many supporters of Julio Cesar. Irenea overcame a wave of threats, declining health, and other obstacles. Her confrontation continued. She traveled throughout Mexico with a portrait of Mariana and shared her story with people so that other young girls would not be trapped in domestic tyranny. Her fight lasted 11 years and 10 months. Some 120 court hearings were arranged during the period of the proceedings. And April 5, 2022 was the date of the last hearing. The judge announced the verdict. Mariana did not commit suicide. Her killer was Julio Cesar Hernandez Balinas. He strangled his victim. The verdict was announced. But for almost a year, the defendant was in pretrial detention. Various formalities were agreed upon. And only on March 13, 2023, the Court of the State of Mexico sentenced Balinas, who at that time was already 58 years old, to 70 years in prison for the murder of Mariana Buendia. He was also ordered to pay compensation to the victim's family. The family itself was recognized as a victim of the crime. Justice was served. The mother, relatives, and friends of Mariana, and all concerned citizens breathed a sigh of relief. They had been waiting for this event for almost 12 years. However, the joy was somewhat overshadowed by the murderer's lawyers. The verdict was announced only by the first-level instance. A hearing at the next level was necessary. The process dragged on for some more time. However, the prosecutors had no doubt that the culprit would end up behind bars. The news hit the national news and all Mexican social networks. Citizens were outraged that the perpetrator was being given a chance at freedom, however slim. Although everyone realized that jail for Julio was a matter of time, Irenea joined the national organization to oppose the murder of women and worked actively on new legislation. After the first instance verdict, prosecutor Dilcia Garcia announced that the structure was taking responsibility for all the mistakes made in the previous investigation. And this case has become a useful practice to prevent similar atrocities. And now there is a clear algorithm for investigating such murders. The society was waiting for the second instance court. And during this period, Irenea met a colleague in distress, Lydia Florencio Guerrero, whose daughter was also killed in Chimalhuacan. Women organized a rally across Mexico with a promotion in memory of girls who died from violence. The starting point was the state of Mexico City, and the motorcade traveled to 32 other regions. In each of them, the ladies visited local prosecutors' offices to promote action guidelines for evaluating gender-based atrocities. On March 25, 2023, Marianne was to turn 42 years old. Her mother joined with activists and volunteer mothers whose daughters had lost their lives to violence to hold another commemoration. The date was symbolic and coincided with an anniversary. 8 years ago, the Supreme Court ordered a reinvestigation into Marianne's case, and on this day, feminicide was officially recognized in the country. The woman wasted no time, and 5 months later, went to the court to propose legislative reform. Her initiative was named after her deceased daughter and was based on a Supreme Court ruling. Irenea asked that the document be incorporated into the state's criminal code. It would become a pillar in investigations into deaths, even those caused by accidents. The woman's speech was broadcast on TV. She took the opportunity to ask the president of the country to scrupulously review the legal framework. This would help facilitate the work of the judiciary in situations of gender-based humiliation and violence. In this way, the perpetrators would be promptly found and punished, and the victims' families would receive material compensation. Her next appeal was directly addressed to the police in the country. She asked for effective protection and security for her and her family. Julio's lawyers did their best, but the case had gained enormous publicity, and the evidence available to the prosecution pointed to their client's guilt. The second instance didn't help them either, and in the summer of 2023, the final verdict was announced. It coincided with the previous verdict, 70 years in prison for Julio. The trial lasted almost 13 years. Over the years, Mariana's family experienced a lot of anguish and stress. Irenea became a national heroine. Legislation was adjusted, and the investigators who scuttled the case in 2010 were punished. The final judgment has been announced. The perpetrator is in prison. Society and human rights activists rejoiced. The heroine mother confessed that she felt tremendous fatigue and longing for her daughter, and no one who had children killed would ever accept such a fact. The struggle of the Buendia family has become a phenomenon and has amended laws to prevent such crimes, as victims and families should not have to wait for years for the announcement of cherished judgments. Marianne's death was horrific. Perhaps she would have been saved if she had not tolerated the violence and escaped earlier, or had not gone alone to the tyrant's house to collect her belongings on that fateful day. The precedent set by her mother's confrontation with the justice system resonated throughout the country's women's rights organizations. The search for justice succeeded, even if it took 13 years. Since then, many Mexican citizens have been able to receive adequate justice and not have to suffer like Mariana Buendia and her family.